Welcome to Quilter's Architect. My name is Mark. In this video, I'm continuing my work on the My 9 Labs sampler quilt. Up until now in this video series, I've been working on making the 9 block. Now that we have all 9 blocks completed, I'm going to work on rows, sashing, and borders. And that's what I'm going to show you in this video. I went ahead and I cut out my fabric to avoid taking up your time in the video with a lot of cutting. If you look at the video description, you'll notice that there's a link to download the overall quilt pattern. There's also a link for the instructions around assembling the rows, the sashing, and the borders. If we look at our instructions for rows, sashing, and borders on page 3, we notice that we have all the pieces that we need to cut specified here. This is using all 6 of our fabrics, and I'm not going to enumerate every one of the pieces involved. You can get these from the pattern and work on cutting these yourself. One thing I wanted to mention though is I sat down and I did this cutting of the fabric pieces before Sherry gave me a tip one day. And I had already done all my cutting first. But she said, you know, when you go to make blocks like 4 patches and 16 patches and things like that, and there's some other uses for the same technique, you can do those as strip set. Well, I've already cut all my little squares for my 4 patches, which in the sashing, there's some 4 patches as well as in the borders. So obviously I use the instructions on page 2 for cutting for the fabric pieces for the individual squares for all those 4 patches. As you can see, like I have these little small 1.5 inch squares for the 4 patches that are in the sashing and the inner border. You might prefer to do strip sets because it would be a faster way sometimes when you have multiple blocks to just go ahead and do strip sets. And that way, for example, you could cut strips of the different fabrics that go together, sew the strips together, and then cut out your combinations of those 2 fabrics, which you could then assemble, like in this case, into these 4 patches. So if we move on to page 3, you'll notice that the first step that this talks about is that we need to make 4 patch blocks for our innermost border and sashing. And if you look at the overall design of the quilt on page 1, you'll notice that the sashing has where the intersection is of the rows. There's 4 patch blocks inside the sashing, and then the innermost border also has a 4 patch block on each corner. That's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to make 8 of these 4 patch blocks, and you'll notice here in the instructions on page 3, if we're not doing strip sets, then the instructions in the appendix FP1 explain about making 4 patches. And in this case, we're using from our list of fabrics, fabric pieces C and L. Once we put our 4 patches together for these smaller ones, their unfinished square size should be 2.5 inches. So I'm going to make 8 of these before I move on to the rest of the sashing. Also, as you think about, you've been working on making these 9 blocks that go into the sampler. When you start getting to this stage, it gets a little more exciting because you're getting ready to see the quilt come together, right? So I'm definitely looking forward to seeing this quilt come together and get the overall effect of all the sampler blocks that I've been working on up until now. So in this case, I'm just going to press these seams towards the dark. And since these need to alternate for our 4 patch, that'll create that nice little offset so that when we put the top and bottom together of the 4 patch, where the fabrics line up, will also be near that offset. Okay, so I've pressed all my units together for my little 4 patches. Now I'm just going to join these together. And here are my 8 4 patches for the innermost border and the sashing. Looking at our instructions on page 3, After we make these smaller 4 patches, the next thing it tells us to do is to make our top and bottom units for the innermost border. And basically we're using fabric piece I, which is a 28.5 by 2.5 inch strip, and we're just going to join a 4 patch to each end. This is just preparing us so that when we get ready to put our innermost border together around the inner part of the quilt, we'll have these units already put together. So I'm just going to join 4 patches to these 2 strips, and one thing to notice is there is a certain orientation to the 4 patches on each end of the strip. Okay, so there is our strip with our 4 patch on each end. Okay, so moving on to page 4, we need to make 4 patches for our inner border. And looking at the instructions here, again, it tells us to use the appendix FP1 if we need instructions on making 4 patches. So I'm going to start with making 8 of the first fabric combination. And you'll notice on this page that it tells us for each combination of fabric, the fabric pieces we need, as well as how many to make. Just going to press my units for my 4 patches towards the dark fabric. Alright, so I have all of my units from my 4 patches made from the 2.5 inch squares, and now I'm just going to join all of these units to form the 4 patches. Okay, now that I have all my 4 patches joined together, I'm just going to press out the seams. So I completed making all the 4 patch blocks for the inner border, and I laid them out here on the table to kind of see what the ombre effect is going to look like from this inner border, and I think it's going to turn out really nice. So the next step is to assemble these blocks into the sides and tops of the inner border. So that's what I'm going to do now. So following the instructions on page 5, I joined together the 4 patches to form one of the side borders, inner borders. And now I'm just going to press these seams open, and we'll take a look to see what one of the side borders looks like all joined together. Here is one side of our inner border made of 4 patches, and the one thing that I'm trying to pay attention to is that I did try to arrange all the blocks in the border so that the darker alternating fabric is all in the same direction diagonally. So that's what I was trying to do as I assembled it, and I want to get all those the same so that they'll match when we put the 2 sides and top and bottom of the inner border all together. You'll notice if you look at page 5, when it talks about assembling the top border from the 4 patch blocks, it not only has these 2 darker blocks on one end, but it has one dark one on the other end, and that has to do with how the sides go on and then the tops and bottom. So I'm going to move on to joining the other side inner border blocks to form that unit, and then I'll do the top and bottom units as well. Okay, so I finished the sides and top and bottom of the inner border that's made up of these 4 patch blocks I showed you before. The side border, here is what the top and bottom part of the border look like. And so I have those all pressed out, and now I'm going to move on on the same page, page 5 in our instructions, it's telling us to make the corner blocks for the outer border. So we have 4 of these corner blocks to make. Those are from our fabric pieces B and E. And so we'll put together our 4 corner blocks, and then we'll be getting close to getting ready for our outer border. So I've finished up the 4 corner blocks for the outer border, and these are basically just 4 4-patch blocks. And these blocks are going to be joined to these strips. So you can kind of get an idea of what the corner blocks and the outer border are going to look like. So I'm going to work on that next. If we look on page 6, we notice it says to make the top and bottom units for the outer border. And the one thing just we would pay attention to is that we orient the 4 patches the way that it shows in the pattern so that we don't twist them around where they don't match up. It's a little bit hard to get it all on screen because of the length of it, but here is the top or bottom outer border with the 2 corner blocks. So now that we have the units together for the outer border, we need to make the horizontal units for our sashing, and this consists of fabric pieces K and these small 4 patches. One thing we just need to pay attention to as we join these together is that the 4 patches are oriented properly because they're kind of opposing. You'll notice like there's a dark block towards the center on the same side of the strip, and that's just a thing we'll pay attention to, that we don't flip those around. Okay, so after joining my inner sashing units, I'm just going to press out these seams. Okay, so on page 6 of our pattern, this is the last unit we're constructing before we start assembling the quilt. And you can see this is our inner sashing with the little 4-patch blocks. So now that we have all the different units put together for our quilt, I'm going to start on page 7 with joining the blocks and the sashing units to form rows. And so first I have the blocks 1 through 3, and I have a piece of sashing in between each block, and then I have the sashing horizontal unit that goes below that. So I'll join these 3 blocks to the 2 pieces of sashing first, and then I'll join those to this horizontal sashing strip. Well, Sherry got me this stiletto, and I think it was because I was using her stiletto. And so the nice thing is this one has this tapered end, and that's the wooden end of it, obviously. I find this much easier to do, the spreading of these seams apart, if you want to press open your seams. It doesn't matter if I've cut off my fingernails, because I've been using my fingernails a lot, or if they're jagged or anything like that. Of course, nobody wants jagged fingernails, but you know how that is. It'll actually snag or catch the fabric if your fingernails are messed up. So I'm finding that stiletto is really handy, even though that's not its primary purpose. It's really handy for pushing fabric through the foot, right? Sometimes when it's kind of not wanting to feed through. But it's really been helpful for pressing open the seams. Okay, so time to join the first 3 blocks in sashing to the horizontal sashing unit. Finally starting to see the 9 blocks from this quilt coming together, and I think they're looking pretty nice. Now that I have the inner quilt put together, I'm going to join the innermost border sides pieces. So I have those already cut and ready, and then I'll have the top and bottom pieces to join of the innermost border. This light blue fabric it's really presented some challenges. I don't know if it's, I'm using from my mom's stash, and probably for a decade, I would say. She hasn't been able to really sew that much. So it's unknown how old some of the fabric is we pulled from her stash and we're trying to use. So I don't know if this fabric is very fine, very like delicate feeling and a little stretchy feeling in comparison to all the other fabric. And so what I've been running into is it seems like things are cut a precise size and they look like they would line up when you join the fabric. You get ready to run it through the sewing machine, and it seems like this fabric alone is stretching or something, even if you starch it. Like I tried starching it and it still seems to be problematic. So I've been struggling a little bit with this fabric. The unfortunate thing is it's in this sashing and it's in these innermost borders. So it's an interesting challenge to deal with. I don't really know, I don't have any way to know what kind of fabric it is since we didn't buy it. Maybe it's a polyester content of the fabric, like the percentage of polyester. I'm not really sure why it's like that, but it's definitely presenting some challenges. I guess it's one of the pitfalls of using a stash from someone else and you don't have any history. Could be 30 years old or 40 years old, who knows? Or it could just be like the quality, like maybe it was a sale somewhere. Maybe it was even like from Target or Walmart and it wasn't the best quality fabric. Time to join the top and bottom innermost borders to the inner quilt. And so here's the inner quilt with the innermost border joined. It's looking nice. Now it's time to join our inner border to the quilt. This is the one that's made up of 4 patches. Just pressing my seams open on my left and right side inner border. This quilt has 3 borders, so kind of confusing, I guess, the terminology. I've been trying to say innermost when I talk about the very inner border and then inner border for the second one. Maybe there's a better way to do that. So I did want to mention to those of you watching this series on My 9 Live Sampler, if you have ideas on other patterns you would like to see featured, that might be helpful to hear your ideas. And then also, I would like to know, like, if you decided to try to make this quilt, even if you adapted it, like someone made a comment that what they thought they might do is use their scraps to make 9 house blocks, because those house blocks, they have all those little pieces, and you could make them, different fabrics, different colors, and that might look really neat to take one of the blocks, like the house block, and make the sampler, but kind of featuring one of the blocks. So I don't know. I just wanted to ask if people who are watching this video actually thought about making the quilt, because it'd be interesting to hear your feedback on if you like the quilt pattern or if you thought this would work well with some of the fabric you had. And then again, of course, any ideas you have for other quilt patterns you think might be helpful for a lot of people, share those in the comments, and that way it gives me feedback on maybe some other projects I should take on. I'm pinning this bottom border. I'll do the same with the top one. This helps us avoid our fabric not being evenly distributed as we join the quilt and the border together. Okay, just press out these seams and take a look at our second border that we've joined to the quilt, the inner border. It's the ombre effect border with all the 4 patches, so it's looking pretty cool. Seeing this almost makes me not want to add the outer border. Time to add the outer border to the quilt, and here on the floor I've laid out the left and right side outer borders, and I'll pin one of these on and get started. Just pressing our seams out on our left and right outer border here. Then we'll be on to our last parts of the borders, the top and bottom outer borders. It definitely changes the look of the quilt adding this outer border. I'll just join the top and bottom outer borders and we'll have all of these borders completed. There's always that challenge when you move something from the floor to the sewing machine of trying to get the pins not to move or the fabric not to move at all. Especially once you get towards the end and your quilt is almost all together, it's much more bulky. Okay, just pressing open the last 2 seams here for our top and bottom outer border. Then we'll get a nice look at the quilt top completed. Well, it's a good feeling to finish the quilt top for the My 9 Live sampler, and I hope you've enjoyed joining me for this sew along. I really encourage you to make this quilt. Maybe you can find some of your scraps that would make even one of the blocks, or you might even have your own story to tell, and you want to choose like a series of blocks that would go work for you. You know, they're a common size, those 9 blocks, so you could even come up with your own blocks of choice. But the quilt really turned out nice, I think. I would say that light blue fabric that I was using, it gave me the most challenges. Even starching it seemed a little stretchy, or it didn't seem to go together, join together like the other fabrics in the quilt. And so I struggled with that a little bit, and maybe everything didn't line up the way I would like it to. I worked in a wood factory one time, and the tolerance for error was a 64th of an inch. So I kind of got that burned into my brain back then. I worked there for like 5 years, and I'm not accomplishing that with quilting, obviously, but it's kind of nice to see things aligned. But there are limits. Like sometimes, you can only take something apart or redo something so many times, and sometimes it's not even worth it. If you enjoy videos like this, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel, and also please leave your comments. What kind of quilt pattern would you like to see, or what would you like to be discussed on a channel like this? That type of feedback might help me to choose content that you would enjoy more. I don't know that I can please everyone because there's so many opinions, but hearing from people is really good. Get the feedback and understand what people would like to see in videos like this. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up so I get that good feedback. Until my next project, I'm wishing you happy sewing and beautiful finishes.